Hello, fellow seekers, heretics, and guildmates. Welcome back to Idea Sheks, where we take an analytical lens to mysticism and spirituality. My name is Kiara, the Mad Witch, and today we are continuing our little tumble down the rabbit hole of psychic phenomena. Did you know that there is a vast body of scientific literature on psychic phenomena, and most of the world doesn't even know it exists? You can learn more about that in that video there. But also why? Why doesn't the world know this exists? I guess it's because we believe what we're told without ever digging any deeper. Even when a lot of people have experiences that directly contradict what we're told about reality, and we still believe what we're told.
Meanwhile,
Ingo Swann makes the case that anti-psychic rhetoric is like digging ourselves an intellectual hole and burying ourselves in it. And if you're not familiar with Swann, he was a renowned psychic and the linchpin of CIA's Project Stargate. And Stargate was a 20-year, $20 million program funded by the US government. It was an investigation into using psychic abilities for military applications.
The only reasons world governments have taken an interest in these things is because they wanted to use psi for espionage, killing people, and mind control. Never mind psi's implications about how we're all interconnected, or what widespread understanding of psi could hypothetically lead to. World peace, sacred economies, the end of corruption, miracle healings. What the powers that be have investigated is how we can use this divine and sacred web of interconnection for control and warfare.
And maybe I'm just a naive woo-woo hippie that loves people, but I'm gonna go out on a limb here and pose the question, if is real, is that really the best use of it? Like, here we are, hypothetically, on a major evolutionary cusp. People around the world in different pockets are figuring out that we can access information beyond our conventional notions of time and space. And we're gonna use these potentially divine abilities to make things worse. People think I'm the crazy one, and I'm telling you, this is why aliens don't talk to us. Please take me with you.
Don't take this the wrong way, like you're cute. I'm just not that into humans.
So today we are continuing to explore some possible helpful and constructive applications for psi. There are many recorded examples throughout history of people, and sometimes groups of people, who have precognitive dreams about a disaster, right? So dreams about a disaster before they happen. And hypothetically, that could be used to avert disaster, like the Titanic. And I think it's important to continue to share these stories, because this isn't the stuff you find in the history books, right? You have to go look at like the primary source documents, which Ingo Swann has done for us. But I think it's important to continue to tell these stories, because maybe eventually we'll put the pieces together and learn from them. The year is 1912, and the Titanic is set to take her maiden voyage across the Atlantic Sea. This was a really big deal. Was it the first time someone ever sailed across the ocean? No, but apparently you build the biggest boat and you put the biggest marketing campaign behind it, and a bunch of the richest, biggest men come waddling. Waddling? Yeah, I don't know. I see those like Edwardian era suits, and they always just look like proper little penguins to me. The company that built the Titanic was so sure that it was unsinkable. They marketed it. They marketed it as being unsinkable, and they put their money where their mouth is, because they threw out a bunch of lifeboats so they could make more room. They could enlarge the first class decks. Good job, guys. Safety first. The reason so many people died on the Titanic was because they didn't have enough lifeboats, which is a great metaphor for this situation, because humans appear to have a psychic alert system that functions like a flotation device for life. And that's why some people listened to their intuition and didn't get on the ship and didn't die. Let's take a look at what Ingo Swann calls the psychic autopsy of this situation. We know the way James Cameron told the story, But what would a psychic see? According to Ingo, it begins some 15-ish years prior when a sailor named Morgan Robertson wrote a fictional story called The Wreck of the Titan. In his story, Robertson pictured the Titan as a huge, luxurious fastliner that was designed to be unsinkable. The company that built her was out to make record speed in crossing the Atlantic. The Titan began her maiden voyage in early April, and aboard it were the beautiful people of two worlds, Europe and America. As the Titan sped along the northern travel routes of the Atlantic, she struck an iceberg due to the unprecedented speed she had been traveling in the dangerous iceberg-infested waters. Her unsinkable design did not save her, and hundreds of people needlessly perished because in order to hold more first-class passengers, the company had done away with lifeboats enough to... it's just so dumb. With lifeboats enough to hold all in case of a disaster at sea. And in fact, many people refused to board what lifeboats there were because they believed in the myth of the vessel's unsinkability. The loss of life was appalling. 14 years after Robertson had published his story about the disaster of the Titan, it proved to be an almost exact pre-play of the actual Titanic tragedy. Skipping down a little. In 1912, as the Titanic neared the completion and people were competing with each other to reserve their space on the maiden voyage, the impending destruction of the ship began to leak into knowledge through psychic means, so the collective conscious, through dreams, vision, and premonitions. Psychologist and parapsychological researcher Ian Stevenson has collected 19 examples of these psychic linkages, which he believes stands up under scientific scrutiny. But there were many more, many of them published in the news media shortly after the sinking. Side note, Ian Stevenson is the same researcher who pioneered the field of past life recall, so the evidence that we have for reincarnation. Pretty mind-blowing. One of those things that stands up to scientific scrutiny, as he says, and you can check it out in that video there. Before we even get into the cases collected by Stevenson, though, let's just make a mental note that a lot of people canceled their reservations, despite the fact that it was advertised as being unsinkable, and despite the fact that everybody who was somebody in 1912 Edwardia was going to be on that ship, right? And obviously, like, their spots were filled by people who were all eager to be part of this historical event, but the number of cancellations is interesting. And we actually saw something similar with 9/11, where the 4 hijacked planes only had a load factor of 31%. The cancellations mystified the owners of the White Star Line, but what matters, since there was a line of notables eager to benefit from someone else's cancellation. At least 3 seamen inexplicably jumped the ship when it was docked at Southampton before setting out into the Atlantic proper. One of these, later interviewed, said, "I just knew the son of a bitch was going down." Some passengers who had reserved space received cables from relatives or friends asking them to not go on the voyage, but to change to another ship. Stevenson has 19 examples that he feels stands up to scientific scrutiny, and we'll go over a couple of these. So one was an English businessman named Mr. J. Conan Middleton, and he dreamed that I saw the Titanic floating on the sea, keel upwards, and her passengers and crew swimming around her. He had that same dream 2 nights in a row and ultimately canceled his trip. Then there was a Mrs. Jack Marshall, who was watching the Titanic as it was leaving. So she and her family were on like a rooftop that gave them a view down to where all of this was happening, where the Titanic was leaving. Suddenly, Mrs. Marshall clutched her husband's arm and said, "That ship is going to sink before it reaches America." As her husband and others tried to soothe her, she became frantic. "Don't stand there staring at me. Do something. You fools, I can see hundreds of people struggling in the icy water. Are you all so blind that you are going to let them drown?" She probably sounded crazy too. You all do. We all sound crazy until people realize we're right. And then there's this. The distinguished journalist and editor W.T. Stead lost his life aboard the Titanic. Stead had a deep interest in occult and psychic stuff, and for some years had been obtaining communications through automatic writing from a spirit named Julia. In 1880s, this is so frustrating. I'm frustrated for these people.
No! God, please, no! No!
In the 1880s, Stead published a warning he had received from Julia that a great ocean liner would sink, and in 1909, Stead gave a lecture to the Cosmos Club in New York in which he pictured himself shipwrecked and calling for help. In 1911, Stead consulted with the famous astrologer psychic Count Louis Ramon Chero, Cheerio? I don't know. We'll be talking about him at some point, but I don't know how to say his name yet. Churro! Mr. Hammond told Stead that danger to his life would only be from water and nothing else. And on June 21st, 1911, Hammond advised Stead through a letter that travel would be dangerous for him in the month of April 1912. Yet, despite the warnings, despite Stead's belief in the occult, he still boarded the unsinkable Titanic in the month of April 1912. Like, how obvious does it have to be before it's obvious? That's my question. So yeah, Stead dead. It's also worth noting that the eminent J.P. Morgan canceled his reservation last minute, and he claimed sickness, but he was known to keep the company of a certain Evangeline Adams. She was a world-famous astrologer who was known for telling people when it was and wasn't auspicious to travel. So just a little tidbit there. In fact, Ingo gives us several pages around the astrology of the ship, both the making and the sailing of it, and it kind of just seemed doomed to fail. And regardless of whether or not there's anything to astrology, I think it's an interesting idea to entertain because his psychic autopsy has two implications. One is that we have an innate psychic alert system, and two is that there are invisible forces at play in our lives, energies that shape the events that take place. And if we become aware of these, then we can learn how to ride the waves, so to speak. So if you're still here and you either are curious or you relate to it or you believe in it wholeheartedly or you're an open-minded skeptic, whatever the case might be, if you want to tumble further down the rabbit hole, do subscribe and join the guild. We are on a quest for answers to questions that most people are afraid to ask. Does this shit exist? If so, why are we not trying to make better use of it? Why aren't we trying to understand it? And in any case, thank you so much for having Idea Sex with me today. Until next time, stay very, very blessed. One calls the psycho... You know why? Because these need to come up. I'm learning. It's going to get a little bit better every video, I swear.